Welcome back to the Create Me Free podcast, where we are exploring how health and circumstance impact creativity in a number of different ways. We are using my creative health cartography framework and working from the workbook I created around that framework. And that framework works through 6 different areas of creativity. So we are in episode 8 right now. In the first set of episodes, we went through how health is impacting creative process for people, some of the ways that it can, and some theory around that. And then in episode 7 specifically, I kind of circled back and told you guys a little bit about myself. Um, just gave you some more background about me. And now we're ready to move into the next section. And the next section is how health and circumstance impact creative medium. So that is where we're at. For each of these sections, we have one free episode that gives you the overview, and that's what we're doing today. And then the rest of the episodes are for paying subscribers. You can subscribe at createmefree.substack.com to actually get all the details and all the theory and the exercises that I work through in detail. But for today, we are talking about the overview of medium. So let me see. So process is how you create, and medium is what you use to create. It can also be a little bit more broad than that, but generally we're speaking about the medium you work in, the material you work with. And let's talk about that a little bit more. So in this framework, medium affects the full physical, emotional, and sensory relationship that you have with how you make. So it's not just the materials themselves, but rather the relationship that you have with the materials and how that intersects with your health and circumstances. So physical. The physical demands what your body has to be able to do in order to use a medium. So you might need a certain posture. You might need to stand or to lie down. You might need fine motor precision. You might need to be able to lift things, hold things. You might need stamina or endurance or breath or the ability to grip. Different mediums require different things from us. And some of us have bodies that do those things easily and naturally, and we don't think twice about it. And some of us have bodies that don't do all of those things in that same way. So this can have a couple of different effects. One effect is you end up working in a different medium. So a lot of times what I've seen happen in working with people is they'll start out in a medium, they'll be doing it for a really long time, and then health and aging and whatever else impacts their ability to do that medium in the same way because of physical changes in the body. And often what happens is they shift to a different medium. So you've been working in dance or athletics, something that requires really physical endurance work, and you can't do that anymore. And so you change to um, maybe some aspect of the same thing. So maybe you're doing choreography instead of doing the more physical dance. Maybe you're kind of marking out the steps and someone else is doing the dance. Or maybe you switch mediums completely. You find your creativity comes out in writing, for example. So because you physically can no longer do the work, you switch mediums. But what also can happen is you just find a different way to work with the medium that you want to work with. So I've probably mentioned Frida Kahlo as an example already in these episodes because she's such an easy example that many people understand and can easily reference. She was known for having a really unique setup in her bed while she was bedridden, so that she could create. So she had an easel that was hung over her bed and she was able to create from bed. She was still able to work in that medium of painting, but it required adjustments for what her body could do at the time. And there's so many different examples of people changing how they work with the same medium as a result. So that's your physical. So similar to physical, but not quite the same thing, is your sensory environment around the materials you're working with. So what does the work sound like when it's happening? What do the materials smell like? What do they feel like? What is the texture? What does the light need to be? What does the temperature need to be around you? Um, and our health and circumstance, particularly health, can impact what we need in our environment to be able to create in our medium. So it's not necessarily the medium itself, it's what's happening in the space around you, but that can impact the medium. So for example, you may not be able to tolerate really strong smells. And therefore, you either need, let's say you're a painter, you either need to change the paint that you're using so that you're not using paint that agitates you in that way, and or you need to change your space so that that doesn't bother you so much. So maybe you paint outside, or maybe your studio is different and you have different air filters or something. That's just one example of how your health might impact your sensory needs, and that can impact how you interact with the medium of your choosing. It can also impact the medium that you choose. Cognitive. So many health conditions and circumstances impact us cognitively. And there are some mediums that require us to sustain really complex decision making across a single session of work, which we might not be able to do with certain cognitive challenges. There's some mediums that are organized more around repetition and rhythm. Crochet is the one that that I choose. It's very repetitive and rhythmic, and you can either follow a written pattern that someone else has produced, or you can just do repetitive stitches yourself, just the same basic stitches to create something. And that does not require complex decision making during the process. So that's something you can do even when your cognitive load um, is challenged. So when I have brain fog, I might not be able to enjoy the medium of writing, but I can enjoy the medium of crochet. So health affects what's accessible to us cognitively on any given day, and that might change how we interact with our medium. It also includes the emotional register. Medium produces different emotional registers for many of us. So some materials and forms that we use might generate a sort of sense of calm, of presence, of quiet. And then other materials are really deeply and physically engaging in a way that engages our senses deeply, or even mentally engaging. And um, this is more like this overlaps with the area of content. So sometimes the content we engage with impacts us emotionally. So it might surface trauma, for example, but the medium itself can play into that. So again, if I'm trying to write, let's say I'm trying to write nonfiction memoir experience of something that happened to me, that might surface challenging things that makes it difficult for me to create, in comparison to perhaps if I tried to put those same things into more of an abstract, maybe into poetry, or maybe into something that's not words, that's more just marks, colors, something like that. It might not impact me emotionally in the same way. It might, but it might not. So that can affect the medium that we choose and how we choose to work with it. And then there's also one more level that I don't think I mentioned yet, is the financial and logistical structures that are required to maintain access to our materials. Um, there are certain materials that are just really expensive to work with, or they require a lot of space. They require a specific studio. So life-size sculpture, for example, is going to be more expensive to create and require more space from you to create, that you then have to find the space and afford the space for, than, for example, crochet. I love crochet because it's portable. You can take one little ball of yarn and you can take it with you anywhere, and you can work with it anywhere, and it's very affordable and very portable. In that scale. So there are some people who do really, really large scale crochet, and there's some people who use really, really, really fancy yarn, and both of those things can be a lot more expensive. So it's not just that it changes your choice of medium, but how you make choices within that chosen medium. So, um, yeah, so the cost of materials, the availability of studio space, the physical conditions, these are all layers of the medium relationship. And when our health impacts our earning, our income, that can impact our relationship with our medium. So that's another thing that I consider and talk about in this section. So that kind of shows you how medium interacts with some of these other 6 sections of my framework. It interacts with, so health can impact money, health can impact medium, health can impact money in a way that impacts medium, for example. So that's we're going to focus on medium, but just understanding that all of these things are overlapping or interconnected. Let's see. I wanted to introduce a concept briefly because I'm going to talk about it not just today, but throughout the kind of as I'm talking about medium. And I don't think I brought it up in one of the episodes before, and it's the concept of affordances. They're from the psychologist James Gibson, and it's defined as the action, possibilities, an environment or object offers a particular actor based on that actor's capacities. Now, that's really a kind of a complicated way of saying it. But basically, it means that there is a physical object and you are afforded a way to use. Okay, so there's a flight of stairs. And if you are a person with full mobility, the flight of stairs affords you climbing, the ability to climb up those stairs to get to a new place. If you are using a wheelchair, the presence of those stairs affords you an obstacle. The stairs are the same stairs. The body needing the stairs has different affordances. So the affordance depends entirely on the relationship between the object and the body. That's what affordances is, and it comes about in medium specifically, and more than in the other areas. A medium that afforded sustained, precise, extended creative engagement when the body was in one state can afford something quite different when health has changed what the body can do. So we're talking about paint, oil paint. The oil paint is the same oil paint, regardless of your body. The affordance is different depending on the body. Paint's the same, the canvas is the same, the clay is the same, the material is the same, but you are not the same as you were maybe when you were younger or maybe just yesterday, depending on what's impacting you. Some of us have really high energy days and really low energy days, and it fluctuates, and that can really impact the medium we're able to work with. So, let's see. So, should I get into the workbook? So we're working through my creative health cartography workbook. If you're watching this on Substack, then you will be able to see some of the pages of the workbook as I go through it. But part of why I'm doing it this way is because it gives me a chance to kind of show you what's in the workbook, but also how I practically work through this stuff for myself. So that if it's something you want to work through, if you choose to use the workbook, then you kind of have a sense of one way of doing that. And I work with people individually through a mapping process that you can learn more about on my website, creamyfree.com. And some of the exercises that I offer in the workbook are exercises I might work through in some of my sessions with people. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, you can go to createmefree.substack.com and you can see some of the more the images from the workbook that I'm talking about here in audio. So let's see. Every workbook section starts with an artist letter. So I write dear artist letters in each one. So like this one starts, dear artist whose body hurts when you create. Dear artist whose hands ache after an hour of work. Dear writer whose neck and shoulders have become a permanent knot of tension. Dear musician whose wrists send warnings you've learned to ignore. Dear maker who has to ice something, heat something, stretch something every time you create. Dear craftsperson who grieves the hours your body used to give you without complaint. Dear creative whose relationship with your tools now includes a negotiation with pain. This is for you. And then I go on in the letter to say the things that I want to say. The entire letter is in the workbook, of course. So this might be you. You might be someone whose body hurts when you create, or it might not be you. It might be you right now or not another time. I try to think about issues that have affected me or people I've worked with and think of them broadly and hope that they apply and will find the people that are meant to find them. So let's see. What else is in the book? So in the book, I have a composite story. Let's talk about the blocks. So in each section, I have signs of a block in this area. So if you're having a block in medium, it might look like certain different things. And I've named 11 different blocks that might indicate, that might be symptoms of a block in medium, 11 different situations. So I'm not going to tell you all 11, but I'll go through 4 of them. So the first block is physical limitation. The statement in the workbook says physical limitations have changed what materials you can use, and the loss is real and ongoing. So there's an artist that I discuss in the workbook briefly who describes the experience of arriving at her studio and immediately beginning to recalibrate. She's been making in the same medium for years, but during those years, her body has changed. So she sits down, and in the first 2 minutes, she's already doing the math of what she can do. What do the hands have available today? What can she grip? What is her stamina? And is she going to have to adjust? Is she going to have to stop? And when she does this, she used to do this very unconsciously, and what was happening was she would show up at her studio and there'd be dread. She was tired at the beginning of the session because of the dread of trying to calculate what the session was going to hold. So she sh instead of having to do that every time, instead of doing that unconsciously every time, she started doing that consciously every time. She learned how to build that calibration into the beginning of the session as part of a session of creating, so that it was just a part of the process and not an obstacle to stumble over. And even though it was kind of the same thing that she was doing before, it was a reframe that really helped because the there's no shame in it that way. There's shame and frustration when you think you should go to the studio and you should do a certain amount of work, or you should work with your medium in a certain way. And the recalibration is just okay, physical limitations have changed. This is what I can do today. What does that mean for what I want to work on? Um, the block of sensory need. Oh, I don't actually know what I made notes to myself, and those notes actually don't correspond exactly to what's in the book in the way that I thought. So I'm going to do two different things here. I am going to read some of the signs of the blocks in this area, and then I'm going to go back to the examples I wanted to give, and we can see if we can tie them together. So a sign of a block in this area: you retreat to familiar, comfortable mediums when your health is bad. And it's not because you necessarily want to, but because that's what feels safe. So crochet for me. I sometimes crochet in great joy, but if I'm depressed, if I'm limited, I will naturally drift back to crochet. That doesn't necessarily, it's not bad, it's not good. It's just, I might notice that if I'm crocheting more and writing less, if my medium has shifted, then there might be something going on with my health. So health and creativity impact each other back and forth. It's not that health impacts creativity only. Creativity can impact health, or creativity can give you signs to what's going on with your health. So that's just something to look at. What is the medium I'm working with? What is it saying about my health? How is my health impacting that? What do I want to do about it? Um, Another example is that your accessibility needs are not being met in the creative spaces that you're working in. That's a sign of a block that's related to medium. You have accessibility needs. So going back to my examples that I was pulling out here, the second core block is the block of sensory need. So another artist described, what he described to me, I'm being careful because I want to make sure I anonymize everything. He described the way his body steers towards certain materials during difficult health periods in ways that feel compelled rather than chosen. So like his body knows the medium that he needs. So he doesn't consciously decide, I need a soft material. His hands have chosen the soft material because that is what he needs. There's a fiber, a weight of paper, a pencil that appear in his hand in a certain way during the most difficult weeks for him health-wise. And over time, he's learned to pay attention to that. He's learned that there's information in that. He's learned to trust it and not try to override it. So a lot of times we try to override what our body's telling us. I want to create in clay, so I'm going to create in clay. But my body's telling me that that isn't working. The medium isn't working. It doesn't feel good. What does my body actually need? My body might need fiber, and therefore we can choose to override it, but most likely for sustainable creativity that feels actually healthy, we should listen to the medium that our body is reaching for. In terms of sensory stuff, this also relates to the nervous system. So if the medium you keep going for feels hyper, feels agitated, feels fight or flight kind of feelings, you might want to consider what mediums you might shift to regulate your nervous system. So the person I'm thinking of works in a lot of different mediums. I met him through his work in crochet and knitting, but he does photography, he does music, he does all kinds of different things. And um, emotionally, when he's not doing well, he can't handle a lot of the high sensory, a lot of noise, for example. So he's not doing music at that time because it's too much and it agitates his nervous system instead of making him feel better. So then there's other times when music does the opposite for him, but it's really just staying in tune with your body to figure out how that medium, um, uh, what it says about your health and how you can work with it. So let's see. Have a couple different examples here, but was there anything else I wanted to name? Well, signs of a block in this area. If you transition between mediums a lot and you switch from medium to medium and you feel like you're always beginning and that doesn't feel good. Some people just do that and that's not related to their health. That just feels good to them. But some people keep shifting because they keep having to make adaptations to what they can actually do, either mentally or physically or financially. So that's another example. If you find yourself changing mediums a lot, then you might just want to check, well, what does that mean? Does it mean anything? Do I have any other notes here that I wanted to share with you guys in this section? New Talked about respiratory and chemical sensitivity and not being able to use the medium that you're trained in, because so you need a ventilation system, you need to work outdoors, yeah, we talked about that. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes and I'm moving on to the next thing. So, um, the book also then I follow each section of listed blocks with adaptations. And adaptations are the resilient things that we do, that I do, that I have seen people do, that I've read about people doing to adapt to the medium. So it's not a consolation prize. It's not, it's just we are resilient creatures who want to continue creating. And so what do we do in order to be able to keep creating in spite of other things? So for example, we talked about if you can't work with those certain chemicals anymore, you can change the medium or you might change the environment in which you create so that those chemicals don't impact you in the same way. You use a ventilator, you work outside. So we make adaptations. So I have listed some adaptations that you might have made already or that you might consider making if your blocks are in the area of medium. One adaptation that's a real strength is you develop fluency across multiple mediums. So like I said, it might feel like a block that you're going from medium to medium to medium, but maybe you're picking up a variety of skills in different mediums because you need different mediums at different times, and that could be a strength. Another one is creating systems for alternating between mediums on depending what the body allows that day. So I talk a lot about capacity. If you look at my Substack, a lot of stuff I've written about recently is figuring out our capacity. So there's a lot of time management systems out there. There's a lot of productivity systems out there, but they often don't take into consideration what your actual capacity is on a given day. And that capacity um, it can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be cognitive. What are you actually able to do? And that intersects with your medium. So what can you work with? So one of the adaptations you might make is knowing what's going on for your body and adapting to what medium you use and how you use it on any given day based on that information. So my work includes a lot of writing, which includes a lot of thinking, but I might not be able to do that on a given day. So I may switch to a different medium relevant to my work. Um, crochet is more of an outlet for me, but sometimes it comes into my work. But I sometimes have to do visual creating online, for example, to do social media to promote the work. as an example. And if I can't write, but I can consider my cognitive ability to create the visual stuff is better that day, I might switch gears and switch to that medium instead. Um, the adaptation, I also wanted to talk more about the comfort medium. So many artists navigating chronic illness or fluctuating health have developed a medium that serves as a reliable anchor during the most difficult periods. It's usually, not always, but usually you will find that this is a lower barrier medium than maybe your favorite medium or your medium that you work in most often or that you've trained in or taken classes in. Usually it is a lower barrier medium. So again, for me, it's crochet, but lower barrier meaning it's less physically demanding, it's less expensive, it requires less concentration, it's more available to you when your primary mediums are not available to you. And identifying that and working with it and actually working that into your work, into your creativity, honoring it and not diminishing it, that is an amazing adaptation that many of us make and or could make to experience more healthy creativity. And then the second, I just wanted to go deeper into the deep material knowledge that is built through making accommodations. So if you as an artist have had to think carefully about the materials that your body requires, then over time you develop a really nuanced understanding of the material itself, of the relationship with the material, of how it works. When the relationship works without friction, the medium's properties can become invisible through familiarity. We forget we we take our medium for granted because we do it all the time, right? But when health forces a renegotiation of that, what was invisible becomes visible, and that knowledge it takes us to a deeper level with our work. Excuse me, I'm just going to get a sip of water. It's warm here today. Um, let's see. I have 3 exercises in this section. So in the workbook, we have a variety of different exercises to try. And in future episodes, we're going to work through these exercises, or at least a few of them, in a lot more detail. But I'll just run through them really quick so you have an idea of what I'll be doing in the upcoming episodes in case you want to subscribe. So there's 3 that we're going to go through. One is sensory recall, which obviously is a memory exercise. So your body remembers, your body keeps the score, right? Your body remembers the mediums that you have worked in. So in this recall process, you're going to work through a sensory memory that your body holds of a medium, and this will hopefully open up information for you about um, how your health experience of a medium is and what that might mean for your work. In the second exercise, it's an accessibility audit. And this is a structured review of the demands of your medium. What does this medium that you either do work in or want to work in, what does it demand of you? What does it demand physically? What does it demand financially? It's an audit looking at what it really requires of you so that you can look realistically at whether or not you have the capacity to work in the way you want to in that medium. And if you can't, then you can do something about it. But if you don't really have that information and haven't looked closely at what you need, then there can be a mismatch that you're not really addressing and that just feels bad. Um, I genuinely believe that all of us have the ability to have a really healthy creative life that supports the physical, mental, emotional, financial health we are actually living with, but it does require actually looking at what that really is and not just making assumptions or following advice that's designed for other people. So the accessibility audit is kind of a practical look at that for your medium. And then there's a letter writing exercise in this book too, and it's about acknowledgement and grief around the loss of a medium. So sometimes, because of our health or the circumstances we're in, we cannot use the medium that we prefer to use for whatever reason. And maybe we've tried and we've thought about adaptations and the adaptations don't work, and we have come to the conclusion that we cannot use that medium anymore. And that's sad. And There's a letter writing process for working through that grief so that you can acknowledge what's going on and process and then move forward into whatever your work looks like um, in the next medium. So let's see. What else? Then there's reflection questions. We'll go through those later and how it all intersects. So that takes us through the workbook and kind of gives you an overview of what medium means to me. So when I talk to people about medium, it's what do you work with? What are the tools that you're working with? What is the thing that your work requires of you? If you're going to go to an art store, what do you purchase for working with your creative self? So that's kind of the overview of what we're going to be looking at over the next month or so. There should be 4 more episodes. Now, these are the paid episodes. We're in episode 8 right now. Episode 9 is going to be my personal story episode. So if you've been with me since the beginning here, I believe that episode 3 was my personal story for creative process. And that's what it's going to be for the next one. So next week, I'm going to talk about the mediums that I've worked in. You've already heard a little bit about them, but I'm going to try to explain them in a little bit more detail as they relate to the actual mapping of my personal health life and what's changed, what it's meant for me, the ways it's been hard for me to work with, the ways it's been wonderful for me to work with. So basically exploring my own biography through this idea of medium. And that'll include some of the stuff from the workbook. That'll be episode 9 next week. Then in episode 10, we'll look at different mechanisms showing exactly how health has altered medium. So I do this through a lens usually of art history. I haven't structured this out yet. So this is probably what I'm going to do is look at 7 artists throughout history whose health conditions have restructured the way that they work with materials. And I'll share those with you and we'll look at it through the idea that there are different mechanisms, different ways we adapt, different ways health impacts our medium. And those will be examples of how that happens. Episode 11 will be mostly theory. So if you are interested in the nerding out stuff about what materials, how they relate to our nervous system, the intelligence that lives in the body, those kind of theoretical things that are the underpinning of where a lot of my ideas come from around medium and working with materials, that's going to be episode 11. And then episode 12 kind of closes it out. We do some of the exercises, we do some of the reflections, kind of work through a little bit more of the workbook. So basically, over the next 4-ish episodes, we are going to kind of weave back in and out between looking at the workbook and looking at my own experience and doing some of the theory. I'll weave all of that in a little bit here, a little bit there. But for the most part, each episode will touch on one core aspect. So a mechanism, a theory, art history. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this one. So when people ask what I do, and I tell them, I explore the relationship between health and creativity. Um, Usually they'll ask what I mean by that. And the example that I often give is medium, because it's it, I think it's an easy one for people to understand, particularly at that level where a physical change in our health changes our ability to work with a medium. Like there's so many examples, for example, of people who were in the sciences or the mathematics, high level thinking, intellectual, or even in writing, something that required a lot of their brain, and then they had some kind of brain damage, and then they had to completely relearn how to work and create. And that's an example of usually their entire medium changes. Not always, but usually the medium changes. How they work with the medium definitely changes. Physical changes when you lose a part of your body or you lose one of your senses, that can change the medium that you work in, can change how you work in that medium. So medium is a really easy one for people to grasp, I think, as opposed to even content, which will be our next section, is a little trickier. It's harder to grasp onto. We will grasp onto it, but medium's also just a fun one. It's fun to think about all of the different mediums that people use, how they use them, and what it requires of us, and, um, yeah, I don't know. It's a topic I like, so I hope that you will like it too. If you have any questions that you would like me to address, you can leave them at createmefree.substack.com. On the episode 8, you can leave a comment. You can also directly email me, Kathryn.Vercillo@gmail.com. And yeah, I'd love to chat with you. I'd love to answer your questions. If you ask them before the next episodes, I will try to get them on camera. But either way, I'd love to answer your questions or thoughts about Medium. And if you have a story to share, if your own creative medium has been impacted by your health or circumstances, I would love to know about it. If that is something you want to share with me, I love hearing other people's stories. So that takes us to the end of the overview episode, and I will be back next week. And I look forward to talking to you. Okay, bye.